Can you hear me? Okay. Well, thank you very much for that kind introduction. Actually, you took away what I actually was supposed to say because I have actually rehearsed that. But anyway, our claim is that our study questions whether teacher educators see the benefits in using MOOCs and whether teacher students have enough digital competence to make use of online learning material in their formal learning. And we are actually going to talk about or present some data from a preliminary case study on how some students and teacher educators completed a MOOC. And it raises some fundamental questions that if there is non-completion or if there is a rejection of a MOOC, what does this say about the future workforce in the Norwegian K-12 system? And the other intention with this talk is actually to try to introduce this concept, blended MOOCs, which we call B-MOOCs, because in the research literature you talk about X-MOOCs, which is like the Silicon Valley stuff, and then you have C-MOOCs, which is like George Simmons. So we try to go in between. So, but anyway, Inger is going to talk about the background for our study.
Before we move on to that, I would just like to give you a little bit of a background about what we're going to talk about. It's from the Teacher Training Institute at the NTNU. And the management at the whole university, they've been trying to focus on education for a long time. And one of the things they've initiated are like 28 projects where they are focusing on developing teaching and learning as opposed to research, because teaching and learning has not been credited, not given enough attention, and this is one of their efforts. And we are actually going to talk about one of the projects that was given money by the university at the teacher education. So at our institution there are about 500 students and some 70-80 educators who are teaching regularly. And we were assigned, me and Magnus, who is sitting over there, we were assigned a job, create a MOOC that can be used for all topics and subjects in teacher education. And we're going to come back later on to talk about what the content was. But the idea was that this should be blended, that we gave something that could be used in all courses by the teachers and their students. Okay? So,
yes, and you have raised some of the bullet points here, which it was a MOOC, or it was a course which lasted which ran the fall of 2015. And the basic idea was to introduce this flipped classroom model where some of the students would follow a predefined learning path in a LMS or a MOOC platform, and at the same time they would have campus training. And the MOOC or the B-MOOC was organized into modules. And when we talk about modules, we talk that each module represents a theme. And each theme, in one module, they were supposed to learn about academic writing, how to create personal learning networks, digital note-taking, how to learn more about collaborative writing and digital blackboards. And it was estimated that each module would represent like 1 to 3 hours of work, and in the total, the B-MOOC would take about 5 hours to complete. And the data sample, it was about registered at 326 users in this MOOC, but we had to exclude 46 from the final data sample because of invalid response. We could not use the data. So it's about 280 users, and that represents 256 students and 24 teacher trainers. And you can only imagine that this is a fairly large number when you see the teacher education as a whole. It has about 450 teachers and 70 teacher students. So, the method, yeah?
No, could you just go back a little bit?
Okay.
Yeah. What we focused on in the qualitative data was the academic writing module. And the way we produced that module was that we took the best teacher or teacher trainer in academic writing at university. We interviewed her, and then we cut this interview into different sections. And then she used her articles or parts from her writing to make up the different elements in the MOOC. And we also had discussion forums where we asked what kind of a research question would you like to use for your exam this year, because it was integrated with the formative assessment and the summative assessment that we had, where teachers had to teach their students how to write academic papers. So it was supposed to scaffold this development as formative assessment and all the way through to summative assessment at the end. And we had 3 phases in this module. It started with an introduction where this sort of wise, quite old now lady talked about what we call in Norwegian kjerringråd. I don't know what that is in English, but she gave advice about what are the problems that you will face when you start writing. Where do you start? And she talked about misconceptions. You don't have to start with the beginning and finish at the end. And what you write shouldn't really be the end result. You can start anywhere. And all these kind of things that, or misconceptions that students have about their writing. So that was the first part. The second part was the IMROD structure that I know you are familiar with. How do you write an introduction? What should be in it? How do you think as a scientist or an academic when you're writing an introduction? And then we sort of moved through the questions in that way. And the third part was about what happens when you're stuck. And some of the students went into that one, and in their comments they said that was quite interesting, because what do you do when you don't know how to proceed in your writing? So we had 3 sections, and the first section was like general for everybody to just read once if they needed it. The second was intended for students while writing, so they could have these pages up when they were writing and consult this. And the last bit was like for those who get stuck, which happens. Okay.
But anyway, so after all these intention was outlined, the students completed the course, and so did the teacher educators. And we sampled the data from LMS by extracting some data and doing a very simple quantitative analysis, and we did some interviews with the students, and these are the results after the course was completed in December 2015. So this shows the number of page views, which shows that, and with page views, we just normally just counted how much online traffic is there in the LMS, which represented the MOOCs. And there is a study, it is a drops down from about, it starts with about 4,000 between 4,000 and 4,500 page views in September to almost 0 in December, so it's a steep decline. And if you look at how much online traffic was in September, it has like these ons and ops, and perhaps you can explain to me why are there like ons and ops in
if you go back one slide, you can see there's a slight bend there. And this has got something to do with the fact that that's sort of delivery time. That's when students have to hand in their exam papers. So you can see that, and it's also the time when the teacher gives feedback to their students. So you can see there's a little bit more activity, because if not, it would have gone sort of down to zero. Yeah.
And in October, you see more or less the same pattern, that in like every 6 or 7 or every week there is like some sort of activity, and it drops down. And we asked the students, how much time do you spend in the BMOOC? And we just divided, or we separated into 4 different categories. And we see that about 30% only use about between 0 and 5 minutes. So it means in practical terms that they only take a peek and they just drop out. And there is about 40% of the data sample. They spend about 5 minutes to an hour. And if we see how much time the educators spend, it's a bit different. They actually don't just drop in and drop out, but they spend perhaps between an hour or 2 before, and are actually more loyal to the intention with the BMOOC. So what do the teachers, students say? Perhaps you can explain more about this.
Yeah, in the interviews we try to understand what is happening and what is the situation. And it's quite sort of sad in a way, because what we are told in many ways is that students, they are eager to use technology, they want to learn, they are pushing teachers forward. But actually, this research shows that this is not necessarily the case. Because a lot of students, they use social media for entertainment, but a lot of them don't really understand how they can use social media and MOOCs for learning. And this is one example. Never learned online. I mean, for this student to change her opinion about learning, lifelong learning, and how she can use technology to learn, it'll take a while. It's difficult. So you can see this is quite disturbing. And again, this doesn't represent all students, but you have a substantial amount of students who think that way. They rather spend their time trying to learn directly, and it's like a quick fix. What is the minimum thing that I can do to get a good grade? And that's what we see. So they find that looking at MOOCs is time consuming, and it's better to get on with the job, just do the job very quickly. And how do we face that as a challenge? That's the problem.
If we continue further to what the teacher educators say, there is a citation saying, I think that face-to-face relation we have with our students is important. I think direct contact with me is more important, and therefore we use the MOOCs and the second-year students. I believe these online resources can make our work on feedback easier. We have high scores on student evaluation, and it's because that we spend a lot of time on relations. So it means that the face-to-face interaction is more valued than online interaction in this BMOOC. Wouldn't you say so?
Yeah, it's true. They are reluctant. They think, okay, this is a good possibility, but the best way of learning is in the classroom with the students. That's the attitude. And a lot of them, actually, like we saw, didn't even bother to get into this MOOC. And there was also something that went very wrong with this initiative, and I blame that on the management, because we were contracted, we were given a job, and then we'd sort of finished with what we were doing. And then there was a meeting like this. I mean, a lot of students were not there when they spent 2 minutes introducing this possibility for being helped to scaffold their writing, their academic writing. A lot of the students never heard of it, and that's the first mistake. And then the second was that the management didn't spend time with the teacher educators to trying trying to show them what this was all about, going into the details and explain or maybe model how this can be done as blended learning. So the concept of blended learning was just thrown at them, and of course it doesn't work. And some of the teacher trainers that we asked, they said, well, what's this? They hadn't even heard about it because they didn't attend that other meeting. So there's a lot of things that went wrong in this. So I think the lesson learned is that if you really want change, you need the management, you need quality material online, and you really have to work on the process to try to get students into a new way of thinking about learning, and this is the whole concept that really has to change if we are going to make progress here. And sometimes you learn more from the lessons that are learned in a negative way than in lessons that are successful. And I think this is something that we are going to take with us in the future, and work on how do you implement these kind of new ways of teaching. I mean, it could be anything, but in this case, it's a MOOC. It doesn't go by itself at all.
Yes, and that was actually the last slide, and we wanted to actually use the last 10 minutes to discuss when we have this story to tell about a MOOC that went wrong. What can we learn from it? And do you have like experiences with MOOCs that went wrong? And what are the important things to work with? Because there are some severe underpinnings that we really need to address in order to make MOOCs successful. And one of the reflections that I got from this study was that when you have students who sort of dismiss the idea of working in the digital and say that, okay, textbooks are better, that raises some fundamental questions about what kind of workforce are we supplying to the Norwegian K-12 system. And it's not necessarily our education system, but it sort of damages and creates some challenges on how you're going to work with the digital in the lower levels. And I think that these questions need to be addressed. And do you have any opinions or any reflections upon this? So we would like to hear from you on this matter.